This is episode 29 with Huffington Post contributor and founder of her movement, Racy Conversations, Karen Fleshman. Hello and welcome to the episode of the UV Effect podcast. My name is Gabrielle Jordan and thank you for joining me today. So today's episode, a really good one. I really enjoyed this interview that I did with this woman today, and I'm so excited for you guys to hear from her and hear about her message. So her name is Karen Fleshman Esquire, and she has a movement going on where she talks, or it's called Racy Conversations, and she is all about discussing the racy conversation, the race conversation, particularly in Caucasian environments, and being able to discuss inclusion, diversity, and bringing that and biases and discussing those things without hesitation to other Caucasian people in order to bring this conversation more to light, in order to not make it so convoluted. So today, or this month, is, of course, Black History Month, an incredible month to celebrate Black culture, Black history, and Black future. Of course, Black Panther came out, and that was I just feel like that was like the perfect way to just kind of celebrate, Black History Month, and to have it come out and just to kind of really feel that African love, amazing Black history love. I loved it. And so, because it is Black History Month, I found it very important that, this month we did talk about, race. We talked about kind of the issues that are kind of plaguing us now in the world, but also some of the changes that are happening and what we can do and what others can do to push our Black future into a brighter place, So now if you follow me on Instagram, you follow the UV Effect podcast on Instagram, you might know that this woman here that we're having on the show is actually white. So Karen Fleshman is a white woman, and her focus is all about diversity and inclusion. So I found that a little funny too, that I'm having a white woman for Black History Month. But there is the reason really is because I find that she is kind of a role model for any Caucasian person that really wants and is for that movement of bringing and pushing inclusion and diversity into our world when it comes to African American people and people of all races. And so I found it also important that I did bring, a white woman onto the show discussing this kind of topic, because I think it's important that we look at racism and honestly, all the kind of issues that we face as African American people, we look at that from the perspective of a white person and seeing what they're seeing and seeing someone that is woke, so to speak, and what they're doing in order to get rid of those issues or to bring in better solutions. So I'm very, very excited for you guys to hear this episode and to learn about her and learn about why she decided as a white woman to devote her life to inclusion and diversity and in the workplace and getting rid of biases and social biases and ethnic biases. It's an incredible thing to me, and I enjoyed her perspective and what she learned throughout her years and why she's doing what she's doing. And I think if you are a white person that's listening to this, she really helps to bring a little bit of what the struggle is, or what your job is if you want to bring inclusion and diversity. If we want this world to be on equal planes, if every person should be equal as they should be, then she kind of breaks down what it is your job as a white person as a Caucasian person, what your job is in order to make that happen, and in order to make this world a more equal place on equal ground. And I think it's really incredible. So I'm really, really excited for you guys to hear this conversation. She's a very smart woman. She's very intelligent, very open and wise. So I hope you guys are, you're keeping your ears open and you're taking some notes, and that you're willing to really take in what's happening and what she says, because I really, really enjoyed this conversation. And I hope you will too. So thanks again for joining me, and enjoy this interview with Karen Fleshman Esquire. thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Miss Gabrielle. It is an honor and a pleasure to be here with you.
Man, we have such an exciting interesting conversation, really, that's so on point for nowadays and really forever. Honestly, it's a message that is constantly being, needed to be repeated, to be learned about, to be improved upon. And I'm really excited to be talking about this with you today. So before we get into talking about your organization, your company, Racy Conversations, and what you do with that, I want to start with just you as a person. What was life like before you found this passion for talking about diversity and inclusion and bringing, these two worlds together?
Okay, before I answer that question, I just want to say how important it is for us to have this kind of intergenerational dialogue and how much I love what you are doing with this podcast and just how inspired I am by you and your mission and your work. And I'm just very, very honored to be on your show. As far as what my life was like before I had my revelation in 2014 that I really wanted to focus on racism, I have been inclusion is kind of in my wiring. I was adopted. And so I think that when you're adopted, it really raises your awareness from a very early age about how random life is and how the circumstances that you are born into could just shift at any moment, and how I've also always been very concerned about inclusion. So, like, I was the little girl who rotated my stuffed animals because I didn't want any of my stuffed animals to feel left out. I've always been very justice oriented. This isn't fair. This isn't fair. And I started as a community organizer when I was in elementary school, and some conservative parents in the community I grew up in wanted to remove the Judy Blume books from the school library. And I organized my fellow students and did a petition drive, and I took it to the school board, and we won. We got to keep the books in the library. And so I saw from an early age how important it is to speak up when you see injustice and that you can really have an impact in the world. And what drove me to the racism focus was my whole career has been in anti-poverty work. So the early part of my career was in the immigrants' rights movement, and I later shifted focus to workforce development. I was working for the city of New York when some reports came out that said 50% of Black men in New York City don't have a job, and we have 170,000 18 to 24-year-olds in New York City, almost entirely Black and Latinx, who are not in school, not working. And at that time, I was working for the city of New York, and I thought that the answer to these challenges was workforce development, like job training, internships, connections with employers. And I was able to develop a program called Ladders for Leaders that was like a summer internship program for young people that instead of doing summer youth employment in a park or a daycare center, they were going off to JP Morgan and Bloomberg and companies like that. So I saw how important it is to have these job experiences and how it impacted the young people, and it also impacted their managers at these companies who, although they lived in New York City, had never really, spent much time with young people who were born and raised in New York City. And I later worked for a really great organization called Year Up that also prepares young people for corporate careers. But I became the mentor to hundreds of young adults through these programs. And I have a saying that my mentees are my best mentors, because my conversations with them, I learned so much more from them than they did from me. And really around 2014, two things happened. One was the rise of Black Lives Matter, Ferguson, and the non-indictment of Darren Wilson. So when the police officer who had killed Michael Brown was not even going to stand trial for that, that just pierced my heart. That really, really deeply affected me. That was in November of 2014. And then a few weeks after that, I was having brunch with two young Black women who are my mentees, but like I said, are really my best mentors. And they're working in corporate America, and they're telling me about how they're just microaggressed nonstop. The company will put them all over their marketing material. Oh, look, we're doing all this great stuff for the community. But their own managers will say terrible things to them, their coworkers, all this stuff. And I just had that moment where I realized, I thought I was helping young people by connecting them to these employment opportunities, but really I'm harming them because these environments are very harmful. And I needed to shift focus to undoing that harm.
And that's really something I want to get into today, talking about really that difference between diversity and inclusion when it comes to the workspace and how there is a huge difference there. My mom is someone that's so incredibly passionate about that, and she talks about this all the time, and how diversity is more like, oh, we're there, we're in the room, but inclusion is when we have a voice, we have a say. And so I really want to get into this in the conversation. But before we do that, I want to go back and just say how powerful and interesting your backstory really is. Your elementary school, starting out, using your voice and making change in your school when it comes to your library. And then to most of your work that you've done in your life, it's been about other people and wanting to make change and affect people that really don't even affect you. As you said, you've shared before how you've gotten the question that, hey, you're a white woman, why do you care? Or why do you put so much effort in this? These issues don't affect you. You don't have to care. You don't have to be watching. Your eyes don't have to be open to this, but they are. And I think that's really interesting. I think that's the kind of the direction that we need to go in when it comes to just the world in general, to not care about what your color of the skin is in order to, to affect change. That doesn't really matter, in the sense that your voice, your story can truly be the main affection of change when it comes to, who you're trying to help and what you're trying to be a part of. And I just wanted to kind of state that, because that's pretty incredible. What is your normal answer to that question when someone asks you or tells you, hey, you're white, why do you care?
Well, see, I see things very differently. I really do believe that white supremacy harms everybody. Yeah. I think, obviously, it has tremendous harm for people of color. And I think of white supremacy as both a business and personal, because it is very, very, it's very much both. But I do believe it really profoundly harms white people as well, because we live in kind of a delusional state. I find it almost a form of mental illness that we are unable to recognize what is going on right in front of our face, right here in our society. And, the whole idea of racism was created to really get power and wealth concentrated in a very few hands, and keep us all divided against each other, so that we can't challenge that concentration of wealth and power. And I do believe that white supremacy only serves a very small fraction of white people, and almost all other white people are horribly deserved by participating in white supremacy. So I appreciate the question, but I do think it harms white people too. And I know for me, I was also very profoundly affected. I grew up in an entirely white community. Okay. My town was a sundown town, meaning a town where people of color could not rent, could not own, could not stay in a hotel. Wow. They had to be out of the town by sundown. And when I talk to people about this, they're like, what are you talking about? I'm like, there were sundown towns all across the United States. In The Warmth of Other Suns, one of the characters moves from Louisiana to Los Angeles and has to drive the entire journey in one drive because he cannot stay in a hotel anywhere along the interstate. And this is not ancient history. This is, the very recent history in our times. But into my all-white community, when I was in elementary school, came a Russian Jewish refugee, okay? And she was like the first refugee, the first Jew, like the first brunette. Basically, almost everybody in my town was like blonde and blue-eyed, And I was immediately drawn to her. And she changed my life. She had a totally different perspective on things. Her family were intellectuals. They were into jazz and painting and just all this stuff. If she had not moved to my town, I can guarantee you and I would not be having this conversation right now. So I saw how having this, how diversity really adds to our quality of life and really makes life so much better for everybody. And I think that is also very much why I care about this issue so much.
And I love that you said that, that white supremacy, it harms white people as well, right? Because as you were saying here is that, you were able, to meet this one person that was different from you. And that really opened your world to so many incredible things. And with racism, because of, as you said, with racism as it's been established to divide, through redlining and Jim Crow, all these different things, it's specifically to divide, from African Americans, from Latino Americans, from Chinese American, all the, because of that, that wealth and that ability to kind of be above the rest. But it harms. And I, of course, me being African American, I would not be able to see from that view either. And so it's really powerful as well to see how having that inclusion for bringing, diverse people into a same room as, white people, right? That can help a diverse person to also see the view of a white person, right? And then a white person seeing the view of a diverse person. I just find that that's so important. I think that's what life should really be about. It's about learning from each and every other, each person, right? And being able to pull, what they have, their experiences, and tie it into yours so you can move forward and have a better established life. I love your story right now so far. It is such an incredible story. I think in the simplest way, it just really brings it shines a light on certain things that maybe people don't want to talk about, don't want to think about, maybe are aware of, but are trying not to be aware of or want to be aware of. It touches on so many little things, and especially when it comes to inclusion. So I want to start getting into that now. I want to start talking about what you've done now because of your story, because of what you've experienced, to, the mentees and the mentors that you've had, to start creating some really effective change in the world today. So you started a program, right, called Racy Conversations. I want you to tell us about what that is, what the goal is there, why you started it.
Yeah, great. And before I do that, I just want to say I'm going to send you the link to this fantastic article by Audre Lorde that she wrote in 1980, right around the time when the Equal Rights Amendment failed. And she talks about age, race, sex, and class, women redefining difference. And it's exactly what you were talking about, how we have no practices of relating across difference as equals. And that is our biggest impediment to having political power, to really to having the kind of life we want. So I love that article, and I love the way that you just summarized that. So Racy Conversations, basically, between that non-indictment of Darren Wilson and then having that brunch with those two young women, I came home and I was like, I really need to be reaching white people. I was like, there's a lot of white people like me. So I grew up in Colorado, and now I've made my professional career in Austin, New York City. Now I'm in San Francisco. exact same trends in all these communities. Limitless career opportunities for white college educated people like me who move to these cities to pursue our careers, AKA girls, AKA from my generation, Sex in the City, right? And then the homegrown people of color born and raised in these communities almost entirely locked out, subsisting in low wage work and joblessness in many cases. And I see it's the exact same here in the Bay Area. We're the second most racially diverse region in the entire United States, right? But if you walk into any of these tech companies, you will see a sea of white and Asian men. And maybe, there'll be like a few women of color, maybe as the admin, the head of diversity and inclusion. And then you'll have like the custodian and the security guards are all people of color. And they're not employees of the tech company. They're like subcontractors. So they don't get all the benefits of that the employees get. So I was like, how can I reach these people? Oh, I know. There's a lot of white people on LinkedIn, and it's like really easy to blog on LinkedIn. Like anyone can just write a blog on there. So I just came home at one day after dropping my kids at school and just started blogging on LinkedIn. And then I just kept at it. The early ones weren't that good, but I was like, I'm just going to start, and then the blog I wrote after Charleston went viral. And then Huffington Post asked me to blog on there. And, I just started writing more and more. And then people started to ask, well, do you teach workshops about this? And I was like, oh, maybe I should start doing some workshops. Because this whole time I was still supporting myself with my nonprofit work. But basically I gave my first workshop in January 2015, so like 2 years ago. I'm not going to lie, the early ones were not that good, but I have gotten really good. I have to say, I am like a voracious consumer of information about racism and going to whatever professional development opportunities I can. Going to other people's workshops, going to conferences, watching movies, reading books, basically people who know me well, they're like, don't talk about racism. Because I will talk about racism. I can talk about it, 24 hours a day. I would gladly talk about nothing other than racism.
I see a lot of your blogs on your website as well. It's a long list. I love it. And then some of the places that you've written, I just love it.
Thank you. Yeah. So now it's getting good. And then basically at the beginning I was saying, my mission is to create a community based in love, learning, action, and accountability on race in America. But really in the last quarter, I came to this kind of point where I'm like, you know what? I really want to focus on just 10% of white millennials, 10% of white Generation Z. Because if we can flip them to anti-racist, then you will have a majority anti-racist generation. So that's why I say my mission is to inspire the first anti-racist generation in America.
That's something I really want to touch on first before I go there, even though that's like kind of something I've been really wanting to talk about ever since I saw that on your website. I was like, oh, okay, that needs to be talked about. But I said earlier in this conversation that the color of your skin doesn't necessarily have to affect the kind of change that you can make in the world. That is very true, but it's also somewhat false too, in the sense that the color of your skin can have a major effect on the kind of change that you can impact in the world in a very positive way. Specifically saying how for you, because you're a white American, you are able to, I think you probably have a better opening when it comes to talking to other white Americans, being able, because I know with people, we have this tendency to look for people that look like us or sound like us or have the same experiences as us. It's a type of way that we want to relate in order to kind of feel like we fit in, or we feel like we're in the right spot, and that's natural. And I think that even me being African American, I often talk to majority of people that that I mentor and that I go to speak to, it's a majority African American. And so I see, like with you, that you are making sure that you put a focus on talking with white people as well, Caucasian people, because you know that you can talk to them and you know that you would be able to really represent as well. And so I want to know, based off of your experiences, where do you think you've had the most success when it comes to this this focus of providing of growing diversity and inclusion? Where do you think you have the most success? Have you had more success with like mentoring African American and or Latino American diverse people of America, or more success with white Americans and teaching them how to be more accepting?
Wow, that's a great question. Well, let's see. If I am trying to measure success, what does that look like? To me, what success would look like is the total elimination of racism in our country. That is what I am striving for. In terms of who is most open to my message, certainly people of color. When it breaks my heart, but when companies hire me and make the workshops optional, almost everybody who comes to the workshop are people of color. Right. And I'm like, let's just reschedule, because you're paying good money for me to be here. And this isn't I'm really glad you're here. And I think it is therapeutic for us to get together and talk about racism. But when we talk about ending racism, white people have to end racism. That is something we created. And it is our work to do. Now, when they make it mandatory, some of the folks in the room, some of the white folks in the room are very threatened. There's something about being called out on whiteness that a lot of people find very threatening. And I think it comes from how we learn about the racial inequality. And so I always tell my own story where, I'm growing up in this all-white community. My parents tell me that racism is terrible. Dr. Martin Luther King is awesome. And the way to deal with race is to treat everybody with kindness and to not see skin color, right? And I think this is probably what about 90% of my white peers are telling their kids right now about racism. But here's the catch. If I ever tried to push, well, why is there so much racial inequality in our society? The story I get back is, we used to have terrible racism in our society, but then there was a civil rights movement, and now opportunity is distributed equally. And so some families like ours choose to work hard, and that's why we're in the situation that we are in. And other families choose not to take advantage of those opportunities, and that's why they're in the situation that they are in. And then you never see your parents interact with people of color, right? Because you live in an all-white community, and all of your images of people of color are from TV, movies, things that your teachers are telling you. Like my town, we were always state basketball and football champions. And so the social studies classes were taught by the basketball and football coaches because those were considered to be easy subjects. And they explain these difficult concepts in very easy ways that never led us to question anything. And so one of the things I've really been involved in is going back and learning more about the history of Colorado. For example, I just recently visited Colorado and went to the Japanese prison, or the American prison for Japanese people, that was in Colorado from 1942 to 1945. 8,000 people living in the high plains desert, ranging from -20 to 110 degrees, living in shacks with no insulation. and surrounded by barbed wire and prison guards. And then about an hour away from there is a Native American massacre site where there were 700, chiefs, women, children. It was not the warriors. It was it was the elderly. It was a very peaceful camp. They had gone to the governor of Colorado and said, listen, we want peace. Let's stop all this conflict, blah, blah, blah. In the middle of the night, this battalion came, and they thought they were coming to ask for peace. And instead, literally, they just slaughtered these people. I mean, when I tell you, Gabrielle, I was sobbing. And you never learn this history.
No.
You never learn this history. So then, lo and behold, I go to a bookstore because I'm nerding out, right, on Colorado history. I go to a bookstore in Denver. What do I find? A book about how the KKK ruled Denver from 1922 to 1928. The city government of Denver was run by the KKK. Who knew? Who tells us these stories?
I know. Yeah.
So I don't even remember what the initial question was, but
you take into a place where I think it's important to talk about, in the sense that you touched on something. You said how white people often feel uncomfortable with being called out on their race, right, in history, and I can understand why it's uncomfortable. Clearly, I mean, something that I've heard go through a white person's mind was they were saying it's not my fault that that this happened. I didn't do any of those things, so I shouldn't be held accountable for it. But when I hear that, I kind of automatically think, well, no, it's not your fault, but it's still your job, because you're still in this position where, yes, you didn't cause these things, but you're still a part of it, and now it's your job to reverse and to help to amplify. So I love where you went with this and talking about this history, and I really appreciate you being very candid with it. Because to know and learn that kind of history is something that is very rare. For me, a lot of the things you talked about, did not know about. A lot of the things, I probably don't know about half the things that maybe went on in my own state. And I think that is something that should be like a homework assignment for anybody that's listening right now, right? Go to the bookstore, go to, a museum and figure out, what happened here that, especially if you're white, what happened here that that's a part of this history that maybe I can now change. Let's make this, let's reverse this, let's change this around. Now that I'm educated on the savageness of our past, let's bring a little bit more hope now to the future, right? So I am very go ahead.
But we have to go back and face that. We have to go. We can't just gloss over that stuff. It's in the Declaration of Independence. It's in the Constitution. And it's still in there. It's not like, oh, we changed the laws and let's go back and erase that bad part. No,
Right.
if you read the text, it's still there. And I also think it's super important, Gabrielle, to learn about the resilience of people of color and how, despite all of this stuff, they persevered. And, for example, that Native American massacre site, they have a race every year to commemorate that. And these descendants of the people who survived that come and they race, for miles. And the Japanese Americans who were living in this, when I say it is desert, it is like yucca, sagebrush, and rattlesnakes. There is nothing there. They turned it into this thriving farm that was able to produce not only enough food for the 8,000 people who were living there, they were selling the food off, And someone who I really think you would love learning about is, she lived very close to me here in San Francisco. Her name is Mary Ellen Pleasant, and she was a Black woman millionaire in the 1800s.
Wow.
Abolitionist, Underground Railroader, put her life on the line, helping people escape, all throughout this, because she could pass as white, and she and her husband would go down in the South and carry people out, right? And then she moved to San Francisco at the time of the gold rush, and opened these restaurants and had a fortune, and she was using that. She was funding the Underground Railroad. She funded the HBCUs. She used her money to advance her people, and it's just an extraordinary story. So I think in addition to learning about all of the horrible stuff that happened, learning about how despite all that, people just turned these terrible circumstances and through resilience just led incredible change is also really important.
That's so powerful, and I honestly, I could go off on that as well and talk about that as well. But I have another question. We need to move on to another question because I know there's so much I wanted to ask. But so on your website, and you actually mentioned this already. You talked about how that the goal for you is inspiring the first anti-racist generation in America. That's a big goal. It's a big claim. And that's, I think, that'd be amazing if we could, if you could really, achieve that. And so my question really is like, how are you so hopeful and how do you believe that this is possible? Because you look at this world right now and it's like, oh gosh, how could it, how could we rise up? How could we get to where we want to be? And so I want to know, like, where does this hope come from for you? Why do you believe in this mission so much and in this goal?
So I'm very inspired by this super wonderful academic, Dr. Ibram Kendi. And he wrote this book called Stamped from the Beginning, The Definitive History of Racist Ideas in America. And I highly recommend reading that book. And if you have the opportunity, going to hear Dr. Kendi speak. And it was really him who inspired me to change my mission in that way, because this is what he believes. And when I heard him speak, someone asked him that very question, like, you've studied the history of racism, like all this horrible stuff, like what gives you hope that we can end this? And he said that whenever he starts to feel down, he imagines the enslaved people who, in the midst of the most brutal, horrific violence and oppression and being killed and taken from their families and being brutalized and harmed and all this stuff, envisioned the end of slavery, envisioned that the end of slavery was possible. And it was actually they who led the movement that got slavery to end. Wow. That it was enslaved people's resistance to slavery that brought the end to slavery. Mm-hmm. So who am I to say, oh, this can never end? No. We have to be very clear. We have to be very, very clear that this is, as I like to say, I'm a mom, right? I am terrified about global warming and climate change and all this stuff. And I wish that I could work on it, but I feel like I can't even start to work on it until I end racism, right? But like as an individual, how much of an impact can I have on global warming? Like I feel like it requires this massive lifestyle change on behalf of, basically everybody in the developed world is going to have to dramatically change, right? But with racism, it's here. Mm-hmm. It is here. We have the capacity to control what is going on in here. We can decide, I'm no longer going to participate in this. I'm going to get rid of all of those stereotypes in my head. I'm going to learn how to relate across difference as equals, and I'm going to build power. And you see it, what happened in that election in Alabama. It was Black women who organized this massive voter mobilization and got, every Black woman and every Black man to come out and vote, and white millennials. White millennials also showed up at the polls. People were very focused on the fact that 63% of white women voted for Roy Moore. But when you did the generational background, younger white women came out and voted in alignment with the Black women. So I'm hopeful. I am very hopeful. And I'm really inspired by Oprah's speech. This past year has just been so emotional. But one of the things I've really been trying to do is to create environments where women of all colors and all generations and all sexual orientations and all socioeconomic status can come together and really talk about racism, talk about white supremacy, and how that is our biggest impediment to achieving our goals as women. We're never gonna achieve it by lean in. Lean in for me alone gets us nowhere. It has to be all of us or none.
Yeah.
And that's what I've been really focused on.
It's really interesting. I mean, I look at what we have right now in the world and the issues that we face when it comes to racial biases, and we look at, even if they're overt or covert, we have these kind of biases that are ingrained in each and every one. It's not just white people, but also in Black people and Latino Americans and Chinese Americans and Hispanic Americans. Like, we all have biases and racial biases and beliefs and understandings and ideas of what people are and who they are and why they are the way that they are, right? And so, of course, those biases, they affect the workspace and who you think someone is that you're working with or that you might potentially work with, and those things, they affect the quality of life and how you work together, how how efficient everything is, and so. For me, I'm looking at some of the things that kind of happen when it comes to some of the bigger brands, like H&M, Dove, and there's been a few this past year of these. I say kind of like oblivious. It seems like it's kind of oblivious, racist ads and campaigns that kind of come out, and it's as if they're not aware of what it is that they're producing before they put it out there. But then when all that backlash hits, and it hits the fan, then that's when everybody starts to realize how awful this really is and how this really shouldn't have been put out there. And so that really goes back to the importance of inclusion, not just diversity, and how important it is to make sure that the voices of all these different kinds of people are actually being heard before, let's say, with the H&M one, with the, the coolest monkey in the jungle shirt. I would hope, that, there was, an African-American person or people on that board that saw that ad, and you would say, oh, let's not do that. If there were African-American people there, hopefully, I don't know if there were or not, but if there were, I would assume that they would be saying no to this, and that their voices, because they're in that room and because they're not just diverse parts of the organization, they're included in the conversation, and their voices can be heard and actually have an effect on what's being put out into society. And so basically I say all this to say that with that main difference, that huge difference between diversity and inclusion, and how when you don't have one, or how when you kind of focus too much on the diversity part and not so much on the inclusion part, there can still be a disruption of that growth and even people that you hire or want to hire, and the kind of biases that we have in the world. So I kind of wanted to get your thoughts on those those ads and things that have come out, and what you think about the racial biases, overt, covert biases that people tend to have when it comes to the workspace.
Yeah, wow, that is a super rich topic.
Loaded it all in there.
What can I say? We live in a white supremacist patriarchal society, and advertising is very powerful, and is a powerful tool of keeping us consuming things and believing certain things about the way we're supposed to live, and what success is, what pretty is, what is desirable.
Yeah.
All of that is produced by the advertising industry, and is very powerful, and starts so early. These studies that show that little children will prefer the white doll, and think of the white doll as the good doll. Why do they think that? Because they are being bombarded with these messages from a very early age. And then you go, my ex-husband works in advertising. So I spent a fair amount of time inside of advertising agencies. Again, a sea of white men, a few white women, and a few Asian Americans. He attended the School of Visual Arts in New York City, right? The most diverse city in America.
Right.
You go in there, it's all white and Asian students in there. And so that is one of my big things is how can we encourage young people of color who are the leaders culturally, right? Who produce all this fantastic visual and art culture, right? That everybody consumes and loves, but yet they're not connected to the idea of, oh, I could apply my visual art skills to a career in design and have this, this lucrative, well-paying career. But it's not just advertising, Gabrielle. I mean, it saddens me, but it's finance, it's law, it's health, it's every single sector in our society, philanthropy, nonprofits, right?
Yeah.
Everything needs to change and to become more reflective of our society. Like we're in this inflection point where by 2040, people of color are going to be the majority. Generation Y is 47%, or Generation Z is 47% people of color, and each subsequent generation is even more, right?
Okay.
So we have to change these institutions, or they're going to become irrelevant. And you see that with the millennials and the Generation Z just saying, you know what, this doesn't work for me. So I'm going to go out and I'm going to disrupt this and I'm going to create something new. And I think it's really time for, it's just time. It's time. We have to break these institutions. I mean, these institutions that they are going to continue, that they have very little incentive to change. We have to take it upon ourselves to stand up and create something new. It's like what Buckminster Fuller said, like, don't try to fix the old, create something new and make the old obsolete. And I think that's what's happening right now.
So this really leads me to the final question that I have for you. My initial question really was going to be, before you said something in this interview, my initial question was, what should African Americans or Latino Americans, Chinese Americans, Hispanic Americans, all diverse members of society, of American society, what should we do to start changing the perception of who we are and start ending racism? But then you said in this interview, you talked about how you believe that it's not really our jobs to end racism. You believe it's white America's jobs to end racism because they created this, and so it's their job, your job, all your jobs to end it. So my new question is, what is the mindset shift that needs to be taken into effect in order to end racism? What is it that, if it's a person that's not racist that really wants to affect change, maybe it's a person that is racist but's just kind of stubborn, what is that physical or mental shift that needs to be taken in order to really get that the end of racism moving?
Yeah, great question. So first let me speak about people of color. And I think, I just had a phone call yesterday from a young Latina woman who's working in a big tech company, and she's experiencing a lot of microaggression, and just her manager said something really horrible to her. And and I was telling her the most important thing is to always remember you are not the problem. There is nothing wrong with you. Do not let this mentality seep into your mind that there's something that I need to change. I'm not good enough. I'm not qualified. That is exactly how racism operates, by getting you to start to question yourself and to start holding back and to feel like you're inadequate. There is absolutely nothing wrong with you. Okay. And it's very, very important that when you start to have these microaggressions that make you feel like you don't belong, you recognize them for what they are, which is a sickness on the part of the microaggressor. Nothing to do with you. Okay. As far as the mentality shift that needs to happen in white Americans, I mean, the people who have studied racism, it's very clear that the way that we dispel these negative stereotypes, the way that we overcome our racism is by relationship building and by really getting to know people of color. There's been a lot of controversy about what is his name, Joyner Lewis, I'm Not Racist video.
Right. Yeah.
But I personally, first I hadn't watched it, but my kids wanted to watch it with me. I think it's had a really profound impact on young people in particular. And when I sat down and actually watched it, I really did like it, because I felt like it wasn't making the white guy look stupid for having those beliefs. Okay. He was outwardly expressing the lies that white people have been sold by our parents, by our teachers, by our ministers. I mean, you cannot imagine these powerful figures in our lives. And again, this is going to sound crazy, but those people are not evil for believing that. That was what they were told by their parents, their teachers, their ministers, right? We have been fed this line about why people of color are in this situation that they're in for a very long time, that was very intentionally created, again, by these powerful people who are like, well, if I just convince them that, people of color are evil, then I can suppress them all and make a lot of money, right? So what has to change is we have to get to know each other. And what we can't just get to know each other and, like you said, not take accountability for the past. We can't just get to know each other and be like, oh, that was a long time ago, and that didn't have anything to do with me. Baloney. It didn't have anything to do with us. It has everything to do with us and the way that we live right now. And we have to recognize that. I don't feel guilty about being white. I'm not ashamed of being white. It is what it is. And in fact, I really love my white family. I love white people. I have many white people in my life who are really wondering. White people are not bad.
Right.
I just think that we are extremely delusional about reality. And when we get clear on reality and when we build relationships across difference, that is what is going to transform our society. As I like to say, this is the year 50 years ago, Dr. King was assassinated. If it were enough to change the laws to ban discrimination, we would not be in this situation that we are in right now. What we have to do is change this and seeing the truth and knowing what the truth is and being really clear on all of this stuff is going to free all of us. And it's going to allow us to create the kind of society that we want for ourselves and for our children.
Absolutely. I'm just so happy we had this conversation. I am the kind of person that strives to be in rooms and talk with people that are different than me and just have other stories than me. I mean, that's everybody. Everybody's different from one another, but it's just always different when, you're a different race or, you have just different experiences altogether. I love having these kinds of conversations, especially when it's not hostile. It's open. and we're kind of learning from one another. And I really appreciate you being on here and talking candidly and sharing your experiences and sharing what's needed in order to really develop our nation and to grow into people that we really need to be in order to thrive and to be able to work together without war and without hatred. And I'm very grateful for this conversation. And before you go, I really want to give you a chance to talk about anything else that maybe you want to share, any links or anything upcoming things that you want to talk about, just to kind of plug yourself, because I want people to be sure they can connect with you, and all of your stuff will be down below as well.
Thank you so much. So a big focus of mine in 2018 is really on helping human resources and diversity and inclusion professionals, as well as individual contributors who may be involved in employee resource groups, those types of things, to develop the backbone and skills and community so that they can be change agents. You think about this whole Me Too and all this sexual harassment has been going on forever. Why haven't people gone forward? Well, because when they've gone to HR departments, unfortunately, often they've been kind of suppressed, or, the HR people have not really stood up as agents of change. And so a big focus for me this year is organizing trainings, organizing conferences where we're going to bring these professionals together and we're going to practice speaking truth to power, so that when we're in these situations, we feel prepared for them. And we also know that, okay, we lose our job. Guess what? I have a whole community behind me who's going to help me get my job back, because I'm convinced we have to change that function in order to create equity in the workplace. The other thing I'm going to be continuing to focus on is educating parents about how to talk with their kids about racism. I call it ending the intergenerational transmission of racism.
I love that.
Yeah, that's very important, because like I said, we were taught these things by our parents and we tend to repeat them. So I'm going to be working on that. And also a big part of what I do is police accountability activism. And I encourage everybody to really get involved at the local level and holding police accountable. And I will send some links about my work in that area.
Definitely. I mean, you're incredible, honestly. So, you were kind of what, hopefully this isn't offensive, but what, the mindset of why people really need, that we should, they should really strive for, that mindset of just, forget about that idea of that superiority, or that kind of complex, or those types of things of the past. It's time to start inclusion. It's time to start making this even plain that it has always really has been, because we are all still human beings, but that we've neglected to be aware of. And I love you, honestly. You are so awesome. I just really appreciate that you're alive.
I love you, woman. I love you. And when I saw those 21 under 21 Teen Vogue that you were a part of, I mean, first of all, I love Teen Vogue. I think it is such a great, I use it with my own kids all the time, the videos on there, made by young people, for young people, and just the young women all over the world they have on there. So inspiring. But I really, I cannot tell you how grateful I am for this opportunity to have this conversation with you. And you look at you go, you're 17 years old and you have done so much. And I also really love that your message is not oh, look, I'm a superstar and you can do it too. But it's really everybody has a unique value and everybody can contribute something. And the way that you approach it, I think, is so inspiring and uplifting. Because sometimes you can hear these people who are like, I'm a rock star, you can do it too. And it's kind of demoralizing in a way, because it's like, oh God, I guess I'm just a loser because I'm not like that. But you're like, no, everybody can do this. It's not just me. There's nothing, that's special about me. It's just I recognize that I have this unique value and I'm bringing it out in the world, and you can do this too. I love that.
And hopefully through this conversation that we've had today, it will help, especially the diverse members of society that's have felt oppressed and have really lost confidence because of that oppression. Hopefully, by hearing what you've shared today, what we can do, what the vision, what the hope is, we can start kind of building that confidence back up and start realizing our own unique values and what we can do for the world, as well as for white people, learning what our unique value is and what we can do for the world to build up each other and bring us back to this even plane that we all should really be on. Again, I really appreciate you being here. Thank you so much for this conversation, and best of luck, everybody. Follow her, check her out. All the links are down below. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Gabrielle. Have a great day.
You too. Bye.
Okay, bye.
Thank you so much for joining me for another episode of the UV Effect podcast. I hope that you enjoyed this interview with Karen Fleshman. I hope that you kind of pulled as much from this interview as I did. Honestly, I really appreciated her and how open she was to talking about this topic, and really, for devoting, a lot of her life to this topic and to this problem that she's working to make a solution. And I hope this inspired you to, get out there and do what you can, whether you're white, whether you're black, whether you're Muslim, whether you're Hispanic, whatever you are. I hope this gets you motivated and excited to really spread your voice, use your voice to make an impact on this world. And if you really enjoyed what she's saying and you want to learn more about her, get, in contact with her, make sure to head down to the links down below if you're watching this or listening to this on my website, GabrielleJordanInspires.com/the UV Effect. You can scroll down and check out all of her links, her website, her social media, all of that, and follow her and find her and learn more about her there. Also, if you're listening to this on iTunes or my website, make sure to leave a comment letting me know how you like the episodes or this episode or any other little comments you want to share, just to give me a little feedback on how the show is going for you. And be sure to go to Instagram and follow us at the UV Effect to check out our next upcoming guest, quotes from this episode, as well as some fun behind the scene little snaps from the Insta story part of Instagram. So yeah, make sure to check us out there and be a part of the family. Again, thank you so much for joining me, and I hope that you'll be here next week. Bye.